Brussels sees the threat of war as very real. It is no coincidence that the first report on this topic was commissioned to the former president of Finland, a country that applies the concept of total defense, and that is very similar to the one currently being considered by the European Union. It assumes that security is not only in the hands of governments, their citizens should also be responsible for the defense of their country. The most important thing is for ordinary citizens to understand how important security is, the Finn said while presenting his report. That is what Brussels now wants to ask Europeans, that we be able to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours. The new document talks about having enough water and food reserves at home to survive before foreign aid arrives. Also drugs and basic services. The emergency does not have to be a war. It can be another pandemic, a natural disaster, or a cyber attack. The threats are many and varied. In order for citizens to first take it up and then put it into practice, the European Union will organize training campaigns, as Sweden has already done. For example, with survival manuals or Finland with the use of its shelters. The idea is to address these contents in multiple spaces, from schools to companies. More and more countries are taking steps. France has published a survival backpack model with basic goods to comply with the rule of surviving 72 hours. The European Union is now making a call to all countries.
And Zelensky describes the agreed measures as good, which also includes putting the means for the truce on energy facilities. But Moscow has already set its conditions and maintains that the ceasefire in the Black Sea will begin when the sanctions imposed on the Russian agricultural sector are lifted, and when the release of merchant ships exporting Russian food and fertilizers arrives. If Ukraine and Russia are the breadbasket of Europe, the Black Sea is its exit door. Both countries produce and export huge quantities of grain that are a source of foreign exchange. Ukraine needs to export to sustain its battered war economy, and Russia, the world's largest exporter of wheat, is not only interested in continuing to sell grain, it also wants Kiev's drones to stop attacking its Black Sea fleet. The destinations of Russian cereal goes to Africa, Egypt, Algeria, other African countries, and other Asian countries. The price of cereals depends largely on the Black Sea. Its opening could relax quotes. Any agreement that can be reached will be positive for the markets in general. Between the 22nd and the 23rd, there was an export agreement with Russia through the Bosphorus. More than 1,000 ships filled with cereal left, many of them bound for Spain. It accounts for more than half of the importation that Spain has on cereals, meaning 7 million tons in the year 2024. Since the war, Ukraine has become our largest grain supplier. With the 10 million tons of corn and wheat that we buy from Kiev, we supply our powerful feed industry that feeds the huge Spanish livestock.
Gerard Depardieu has refuted the story of Amélie, a set designer who says that the actor in 2021, after making a dark comment to her, surrounded her with his legs and arms to touch her private parts over her clothes. He has said that he has no need to rub a woman, and that it is difficult to surround her with his limbs. When she weighs 150 kilos, he said, and has a huge belly. Regarding the comments, Ostanos says that she misinterpreted vulgar and rude expressions typical of someone like him, who is always in a bad mood. Amélie has said that everything she has said about Party is false. The trial continues this afternoon. The statements of witnesses are also pending. Actresses in favor as Fanny or against as Anna Greenberg. The 13th of March, the National Security Advisor invites a journalist, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, to a chat group, and there's the vice president, the leader of diplomacy, the head of the Pentagon, and the head of intelligence. They talk about bombing Yemen's Houthis, the insurgents who attack commercial ships in the Red Sea. The vice president has doubts. He says that it is European ships that use this route the most. Odio is rescuing Europe again, he writes. The Pentagon chief replies, "I share your hatred of the Europeans getting free. It's pathetic." The journalist reads the messages with amazement. It seemed unlikely to him that the security leadership of the United States was discussing in a chat of a commercial application attacking another country. But on the 15th of March, the head of the Pentagon sends the group a plan with weapons and targets, and the bombs begin to fall on Yemen. The journalist realizes that everything is true, and days later reveals it. Trump says he knows nothing, and that the magazine is a ruin. The head of the Pentagon denies having sent war plans, but in the White House they recognize that the conversation is authentic, and say that they are reviewing how they unintentionally included the journalist's number. It is an unusual security flaw, and here the law punishes harshly sharing with those who should not such sensitive information as a military operation. And just today, the Valencian ombudsman has said that the administration failed to protect the right to life during that Dana. In his annual report, he explained that there are clearly responsibilities incumbent on the Generalitat and denounced the lack of loyalty and cooperation between the administrations. The ombudsman, Angel Gabilondo, has also presented his annual report to the Congress. He has said that he will continue to be attentive to the response that the authorities give to the consequences of the Dana. The staging yesterday said it all.
Here are the budgets.
Mazon was self-congratulating for his pact with Vox between the applause of the national leadership of the party and the ovation of his own. I do not know if the statements of Mr. Mazon produce more chills, or to see his political party pulling at him. That path, the one that Mazon has taken, they say in the PP, is the right one.
That presidents who do not have majorities in their chamber are working to give their administration the necessary stability is positive. This is the best example of political stability.
And the intention is that Aragon and Murcia do the same, and that they must also assume, as Vox asks, their requirements without hesitation.
Support for budgets should depend on budgets, right? I think it's common sense.
But right after the Murcian president refused to take in minors and charged against the Green Pact,
Environmental policies that are suffocating the primary sector.
the president of Aragon for the moment remains in the criticism of the measures of the Green Pact.
They are wrong, that as I just told you, objectively they are nonsense.
Vox is not worth it. In order to move forward in the negotiations, it requires a clearer rejection in a formal statement such as the one made by Mazon. Yes or no? Are you going to present budgets, or are you going to continue in constitutional default? It is a constitutional obligation, and not two whims of two autocrats, like Sanchez and you. With Sanchez, there is only money for Sanchez's whims, controlling the media and riding Pedro. Your questions, what do they lead to, Mrs. Garcia? That I tell you now all the corruption cases that are waiting for the Popular Party, because I can do it kitchen leso. Irregular contracts of the SAS, Mr. González Amador, practice useful politics. They use their photos to improve the well-being of Spaniards. Weeks of rains leave this image on the boards of Daimiel, but the groundwater level has risen so fast that it is causing land collapses in the park environment.
And that sudden rise in the water table does is wash away the finest materials that are in the ground. It would make it easier for the collapse of these cavities and the collapse of the roof to take place after the washing.
These sinkholes are known as sinkholes. They occur in aquifers linked to rocks such as Daimiel. Those formed by sands or clays do not occur. An example would be that of Due Anna. It has also been loaded with water these days. This is the before and after. The accumulated precipitation already exceeds the annual average.
The vegetation is starting to recover. The marsh has been flooded, which is very good news, both for all the species that depend on the marsh systems and for the waterfowl, that we hope there will be a good reproduction this spring.
Aquifers, scientists say, function as a bank of our waters with storage capacity for years.
The water that is recharged in a hydrological year can come out years later. Sometimes, even some aquifers may be discharging groundwater that has been recharged even decades ago.
Even so, they warn, with water we can never relax. Now that there is, it is time to plan its management well and strengthen infrastructures that allow optimal use. Those of us who were here to tell about it were aware of the situation. It was the 28th of February last. While the Pope is eating, he suffers a bronchospasm, he can't breathe, he inhales vomit, and calls for help. According to the doctor who was at the head of the team, some were crying. They decided to try everything to save him, because this was what Francis himself had indicated to his personal health assistant, whom we saw on Sunday accompanying him on the balcony of the hospital. It was the second time they had seen the death up close, including the Pope, aware that he might not make it through the night. It was necessary to wait between 24 and 48 hours to check if the vomit had reached the lungs. It wasn't like that. The treatment worked, and finally, last Sunday, already out of danger, he was able to return to the Vatican,